I'd like to introduce Mark, who will be our presenter today. And I'm going to let you introduce yourself because it often looks like I'm just reading something when I do that. And that'll be much livelier. So if anybody doesn't have any questions, I'll hand the microphone over to you. We'll begin.
Great. Thank you, everybody. It's unusual for me to do these for a group that I know half the people. I do these usually in other parts of the country. Scary, I've been in IT for 37 years. A couple of decades of that was in the supply chain space. I got pulled into digital analytics and infrastructure out of IBM, and I've been in cyber in other areas probably in the last 10 years or so. But in 37 years, you get to do a lot of different things. So we're going to talk specifically today about cyber supply chain risk management. So we're going to talk a little bit about why people are so worried about it and where the supply chain is. We're going to cover NIST IR 8276, which was published by NIST about cyber supply chain risk management. So I'm going to cover that as part of this. Talk about how the government responded, some example cyber incidents or breaches in this that you've heard of that are really supply chain ones, and then show you a practical example of how to actually deploy this. So we'll try to make this something useful that you can walk away from this and get something you can actually use or have an understanding of how to kind of deploy these cyber supply chain risk management programs inside of your organization. And I'll try to leave some time for questions. If somebody like Dave or somebody else can take care of any online questions and speak them, it's hard for me to pay attention to those. So when we look at the supply chain, it's been at risk for some time. Part of the reason is it's so big. You know, international trade has grown exponentially, and frankly, under COVID, it grew even more, you know, because so much of it was shipped to home, online, and less in person at retail entities. The supply chain actually exploded in that. And the government published in February of 2021 this document, the final published document of NIST IR 8276. In this document, we'll cover it specifically. They felt the biggest problem in the supply chain was they just have such a severe lack of visibility into the supply chain when you have foreign ports, shipping, docks, trucking, electronic transfer of all the documents, so on and so forth. It becomes so massive. And I'll cover a little bit about, when I say massive, how massive it really is and why it's a problem. So COVID really exposed how at risk the supply chain was. There was a ton of articles out there that the supply chain shattered. My group within our company has a massive supply chain practice still, though I'm mostly on the compliance, audit, and cyber side, not on that area. But we're all part of this group because we originally came out of supply chain. For those, what's interesting for people who live here in Southern California, I don't know if you realize, but last year, if you drove at night from San Diego up through Long Beach in LA, there was a string of lights along the water the entire way. And for those that don't realize what that string of lights was, those are freighters backed up at the port trying to get into the LA Long Beach harbor. For those who don't aware, about 40% of ocean freight in the US comes through that harbor. It's massive. It is the biggest one in the US. And LA Long Beach is a misnomer to me because they're literally adjacent. I mean, they're side by side. So they, in my view, they act as the same harbor, but they're considered two different ports there up in Long Beach. But it was so bad at one point in Oakland, in San Diego, that they forced them out to sea in Oakland, about a 100-mile string of freighters out to sea. And they did the same thing along the coast in San Diego because the diesel pollution from the freighters was killing everybody in Long Beach. People's eyes were burning, they couldn't breathe. It was so bad because they were backed up so far. So for us in SoCal, we were directly affected. And as a supply chain person, when I first saw the string of lights all the way, I was astounded. Never seen anything like what's been going on right now. Last summer, shipping rates hit incredible numbers. They were $20,000 a container. I remember when they were $1,500 a container, okay? So just so you understand, one of the biggest problems inflationary-wise and others are not just the price of energy, but it's also the problem of the supply chain, and the shipping costs went to the moon, okay? Now, I happen to have a daughter who works for one of the supply chain companies in the world called Flexport. So I have some inside scoop on some of the international shipping and what's going on there, with a personal conversation with my daughter at the house periodically. We have seen some reduction in shipping times, and I pulled this fairly recently, this example chart, but if you look at what happened, it got crazy. The overall, overseas shipping times, but they are starting to come back down at this point, okay? Now, I also pulled some other data, so I tried to update this. Some of this data I pulled in the last week, okay, where the cost kept falling for the Asia to West Coast down to like half or less than it was, but it's still significantly higher than the norm. So costs for supply chain and shipping overseas in the freight containers is still way outside industry standard and industry norm, but it's not as bad as it was a year ago, okay? It has definitely retracted a little. This was pulled, an article in a direct quote from one of the people at Flexport, and if you're not familiar with that company, they're pretty easy to find. They're a high-tech shipping entity based out of the San Francisco Bay Area, worldwide ports in like Singapore and other areas. So it has dropped. They were at, back in October, it was 110 days. I talked to them, it dropped down about 15 days, which, by the way, is significant, okay? But it is also part of our inflation problem and others, and then we're going to talk about the cyber issue as to why people are so concerned. This is already broken. Bottom line is, costs are off the chart, freight's back up to the moon. If you haven't driven through the Long Beach Harbor during the day or at night, it's weird. They have stacked containers like the size of buildings, which, by the way, pre-COVID, they weren't allowed to do. The only reason they did that, and they're doing that today, is to get the ships out, is to allow them to offload it. My daughter had a customer with Christmas trees in for Christmas. I don't think that came out of the port until March. So those Christmas trees stayed through March, okay? So when you look at this, I pulled some stats out here for you to understand how big this problem is. So when we looked at this, and this was in 2019 dollars, it was in $14 trillion ships by sea, okay? The numbers are astounding today in terms of size of international trade and how much ships by sea. I have not seen the statistics for this year, but I guarantee you for COVID and above, they're even bigger. These numbers exploded because of the change in the way everybody did business on the supply chain. So when we're talking about a multi-trillion-dollar problem, not a million or a billion, we're talking trillions here, which is now the Department of Homeland Security was very worried coming into the what was going on with the Russians and the Ukrainians. Okay, they were specifically worried that on the supply chain that is already broken, that they would do cyber attacks to break it even more. Okay, and so it can be the straw that breaks the camel's back. So the government has been issued warnings. Now, they certainly did massive cyber attacks against the Ukrainians, but I think they've held off a little bit against the Western Europe and the US from what I'm seeing so far. So don't assume that it's going to stay that way. If it deteriorates and gets worse, you know, there are some horrible potentials there of obviously massive cyber attack and God forbid, you know, using tactical nukes or some other crazy option in today's world. But they're quite concerned about this still, and they were concerned about this before. Now, there is a very, very good resource out there called CISA.gov. For those of you who have not gone out to this site and you're in different industries, I'd highly, and by the way, I shared this presentation with Dave so that he can send this out to you so you don't have to write down all the URLs. Just ask Dave for this. All of the different articles, NIST, others are all, I have the URLs for all of them in the presentation. So you can go out and do your own research to back up what's going on in this area. I found this to be incredibly useful. And I can't say I've read it every page, but I've read a lot of the industries I deal with through this, and I highly recommend if you're in consumer products or if you're in chemical or energy or others to go out and look at this and see what the recommendations are for your particular area. Now, what people don't realize are prior to the Russian-Ukraine war, there were some Russian hackers that they've been attributed to, and I think we all know attribution is tough, right? But the Russian hackers admitted it. So those, I actually had this conversation with the Denver Cybersecurity, ISSA Cybersecurity group, the same presentation, and JBS Meats, who supplies something like 50% of the meat to the United States, is in Colorado. Just happens to be in Colorado. They were completely shut down, and it cost them an $11 million ransom payment to unlock that, and that came out of Russian criminal hackers, which sometimes the Russian criminals and the Russian government sometimes do the same thing. So
When was that?
that was last year.
Yeah.
Yeah. Very significant. Okay. So the other one that I put at the very top was the Colonial Pipeline. So the Colonial Pipeline was also attributed to that. We didn't feel it here on the western U.S., but it wiped out fuel deliveries for the vast majority of the eastern seaboard. And when you stop that, you get a supply chain. People, they need trucks. Okay. Contrary to popular belief, they're not electric today. They run on diesel, you know, and to deliver all those products to all the places that they belong was shut down. So some of us think it was a test by the Russians to see how badly they could mess up our supply chain. And they proved that they could mess it up pretty well if they really went at it. And they used examples of food and fuel, okay, which are critical components to our everyday lives. We need to be able to heat our homes, turn on the electricity, feed ourselves, so on and so forth. Look at it. What people don't realize is that attacks like NotPetya cost something like $10 billion worldwide. It was considered a supply chain attack. And attacks like Target, years ago, attacked via their HVAC systems, okay? So what they did is they attacked the HVAC suppliers in the stores for Target, compromised those. They were on the same network as the rest of Target's network, and they used that to go throughout the entire one and steal millions of dollars of credit cards. Now, people lost their jobs at Target. C-level executives lost their jobs over that hack. For those of you that weren't around to realize that it was significant because they cut off the heads not of the lower level people, but of the senior level executives because of that problem. So there's two things you have to be really worried about in these here. The first one is they do a direct attack like they did it like Colonial or the JBS, where they attack you directly to mess up yourself, or they attack your third-party supplier to mess up their delivery of products to you, or they use it as an attack vector into your organization, because we're all interconnected today. I'm on the Amazon Guest Network here today. You're on your Wi-Fi. You're on your Bluetooth. You're on this. We all know it's all interconnected. And in the case of a supplier, they do EDI and electronic connections. Most suppliers do that electronically. They're not sending manual purchase orders. They're not sending manual paperwork. They're not sending this. these people are connected to most of their suppliers, right? I mean, so they have vectors into your organization. Now, for those who aren't familiar with RAND is one of the big think tanks on the West Coast, okay? So this gentleman actually published a document that talked about the combination of cyber attack and supply chain creates both economic and national security issues. It really affects both of them. So they're both worried about our ability to respond militarily and the ability to completely disrupt our economy. Okay, so this one is a tough one for us and not well handled, unfortunately. It is difficult to do third-party risk assessment with your third-party suppliers. You know, it's hard enough to do it internally in your organization, never mind doing it externally to hundreds or thousands of suppliers, right? It becomes really, really challenging. But luckily, there are ways to actually solve that. Much better than there was 10, 15 years ago. So the Biden administration in early 2021 was concerned about this. So they actually issued an executive order on American supply chains. So the executive branch of the government looked at this about a year and a half ago and was quite concerned. So there are documents out here that you can find this executive order that they issued because they were looking at it. And you'll notice it was February of 2021. Simultaneous to that, how many people in this room are familiar with NIST? Everybody. Okay, so I think NIST is a great organization in the federal government. It's not perfect, but it's one of the really good entities in the government that provides us valuable information and guidance. It's a multi-billion-dollar department with thousands of people, so I think we should take advantage of, and it's free. You know, we get this for free. You don't have to go out and pay for this. So they, at the same month that the Biden administration was putting out executive orders, NIST published their final draft of this, NIST-IR 8276, and it was Key Practices in Cyber Supply Chain Risk Management. It was this exact topic. And it's not a hard read. It's not bad. It's not like reading NIST 853, okay? For those who don't know how ugly that is, it's probably 400 pages, who knows?
Yeah.
You know, it's beastly. This one's simple, relatively easy to follow, and a very good source for use as a guidance. And the people that wrote it were much smarter than I am. So I'm taking advantage of theirs. They put out there what they viewed as key practices that you had to do in this area to do a cyber supply chain risk management program. And they abbreviate it in there as C-SCRM. I know we kill ourselves with alphabet soup, but you know, that's the abbreviation. They do believe you have to establish a formal program with the suppliers, okay? This is pulled, by the way, straight out of NIST-IR 8276. This isn't me deciding that these are my 8. This is their 8, okay? You have to collaborate with them. You have to look at resilience, monitor, and plan it. It is not a one and done. The problem with supply chain is the products come and go, suppliers change, this. It has to be a cyclical program that is run quarterly, biannually, whatever you're going to run it. But it's really expected to be a continuous improvement cycle when you're dealing with your cyber risk with your third-party suppliers. By the way, questions are fine. Just raise your hand, throw them out. But I did leave some time at the end for open discussion because I think I learn as much in these meetings from the audience as I try to project back to the audience. There's a lot of smart people in ISACA and ISA and the others.
Sure.
This is actually from the appendix of 8276, and it talks about different standards in that appendix and what they do. I'm going to show you an example today of how to use NIST Cybersecurity Framework to do a third-party risk assessment as an example, but you are not limited to using that particular tool or that particular technique, but that's what I'm going to show today. For most of you, if you don't realize how dominant NIST CSF is in the United States, it's expected that it has something greater than 50% adoption in most areas because the government forced it as a standard. And frankly, it's a good standard. I've worked with that since it was first introduced, and it was a lifesaver to communicate from the technical people to the mid-level management to the executive management. It's the kind of framework, while not perfect, I'll repeat, some people throw rocks at it, it's got some holes, but overall, if you followed that, you would be better than 95% of the people in the market if you truly had a full NIST CSF program in place for security. It works pretty well. And it's easier than ISO. For ISO 27001 cyber program, I find it easier to follow than ISO, but I'll admit guilt. We use ISO because we're a multinational. So I'm using ISO in one of my divisions. So the key things in these is you got to make them measurable and actionable. It's one thing to have these checklists or other programs, but if you can't make them measurable and actionable, it's kind of difficult. Now that, you also have to be able to deploy it. If you've got hundreds or thousands of suppliers, you're not going to deploy this via an email engine. I'm going to send 2,000 email for my supply chain risk management one. Good luck trying to consolidate the data and find out who's good, who's bad, where your primary problems are, so on and so forth. Almost impossible today because of the third party part of it. It's hard enough, as I said, internal, never mind external. So I'd also recommend you use industry standards. I'm sorry, and I won't name names on the big entities, but when I see the big guys put in a proprietary assessment for this stuff, and then I come in afterwards, I say, well, how do I compare that to the next supplier over here when you use some proprietary assessment of your own? If you at least used this CSF, ISO, or some other standard, then I have a standard to put it up against. So if I do Citibank, and then I do Costco, and then I do Walmart, and I do Amazon, I do these different ones, I now have some measurable comparisons, because let's face it, these are all comparisons to, you can't be perfect. Cybersecurity and compliance and the others are a black hole. There is no such thing as perfection. You can always do more. But if you are doing well and you're measurable, at least you know that you've done what is reasonable in your environment. Okay? Now, I also am a fan of CMMI, where you can. CMMI, yes?
Just out of curiosity for everybody here, does anybody work in an industry where you're bound to adhere to the NIST standards? No.
So CMMC is a NIST standard, actually. So if you have to do CMMC, you're bound to NIST. You don't realize that. Not everybody realizes that's actually some NIST standards that they originally layered on with CMMI. Now, the original, we'll talk about CMMC for a couple of slides because it's a very good example of a supply chain risk management program, but it's gone through some iterations and changes because people struggled with it. And part of it is complexity. Let's face it, these things are complex, right? We're not talking about some simple little problem. We've got a multi-trillion-dollar problem in a fully connected world with cyber and privacy and you name it, you know. So it is tough. So CMMC. CMMC version 1 actually used the 5 levels from CMMI. Now, CMMI is owned by ISACA. The CMMI Institute is owned actually by this organization. Yeah. So usually when I come to an ISACA meeting, I don't have to tell them about CMMI because ISACA people understand CMMI. For those who don't know the background, it came out of Carnegie Mellon in the late 1980s for the Air Force to develop a program maturity model for their programs. It just so happens that my boss was at Carnegie Mellon in the late 1980s and personal friends with the people who originally developed CMMI. So I wasn't a CMMI advocate or bigot until I met my boss, and then I was like, he sold me on it, and I understood why it was so valuable in these other areas. So even an old dog can learn new tricks, and I'm an old dog, but I still learn new tricks on this stuff. And CMMI is valuable. What they felt, okay, So this is what, some people have used CMMI and they don't know it. It's this 5-level maturity model that says initial, managed, defined, quantitative, or optimized. So it is a numeric measurement. Part of the problem with things like this cybersecurity framework, one of its limitations, or ISO and the others, is there's no numeric measurement, okay? So if you're not, I was a chemist originally and switched into systems. I'm a killer for numbers in process, right? If you mixed it up in the wrong way as a chemist, it blew your face off. So you were pretty careful. You didn't mix it in the wrong order or the wrong quantities. Having said that, they had back from the people trying to deal with CMMC, and they said the 5 levels are too complex for us, okay? So they, in B2, if you're laughing, Neil's laughing over here, but that was the pushback, okay? I don't necessarily agree, but if it is the standard, so they went off of the CMMI standard with CMMC V2 to a 3-level functional advanced expert. And if you look, when I say this is NIST, this is NIST 800-171. CMMC is NIST embedded with a maturity model. That's really all it is here. And it is one of the attempts that the Defense Department and the Pentagon made to assess the cyber risk of their suppliers, okay? So they've been at this on that side because if you can't get it, I was joking in the hallway, if you're buying your jet parts from China, you might have a problem if you go to war with China. They'll stop delivering parts and your planes won't fly or your tanks won't move or this. So they have plenty of reasons to be really quite worried about this, and we get a lot of manufactured parts from outside North America, right? For those who aren't that familiar with NIST, cybersecurity framework, it goes function, category, subcategory. This cross-reference is nice, but actually it's not that accurate. And NIST admits to accuracy issues on this one. They've even considered dropping it, because I actually talk directly with the analysts at NIST, probably once a month, once every other month. I have interactions with a bunch of the NIST analysts are in my inner circle of people that I talk to get information from. Okay. So when you look at it, it's pretty straightforward, and I did the one in the book and the little miniature Einstein on the right. When we look at the two different, most frameworks like ISO, NIST, and the others are risk and narrative. They're all risk and narrative. Okay, if you can, and you can't always do this, you won't always be able to because of complexity, where they complain in CMMC of maturity complexity. Adding a numeric measurement that's a standard across gives you much better measurement over time and much better comparison tools over quarters, like year over year, quarter over year, or company to company. So it's a nice tool if you can get it layered into it. There are, and I don't know if I have this slide in here, there are open source data for some of this in areas called Secure Controls Framework. The problem with it is the data is so beastly that it's almost unusable. It's great data, but it has like hundreds of rows and thousands of columns. We figured within one cell in some cases are 8 different pieces of data. So our best estimate of that spreadsheet is somewhere between 1.5 million to 2.5 million pieces of data. And we actually wrote programs to peel it apart. That's why we have those numbers. We actually wrote some natural language processing code to look at what that thing said. And some of it, because it's open source, the grammar's bad, this is bad. It's got some weaknesses. However, back to the NIST, I still like it. It's still a good data source that you're not trying to do it all yourself, that you can use as a data point for different areas. Okay? So, next. Now, we actually do this for ourselves. So we own an MSSP out of Tel Aviv called Cyberproof. Okay? Cyberproof is a tier 1 managed cybersecurity SOAR and SOC provider, very big in EMEA originally, moving to North America, very high end. So we originally started doing this work for ourselves. We were trying to assess clients and see, we're about 30,000 people worldwide, technical consulting. That's what we did. So we looked at it a few years ago, and we were like, how in the world do I evaluate where these clients are to help them? If I can't tell, you go to the doctor, they take 1 million blood tests, you know, x-rays, this, that, the other, they kind of have a feel. But for companies to try to understand where they really needed it, and we looked at tools, and a lot of them were antiquated, so we actually built this in the cloud. And the reason we felt in the cloud was the answer was the ability to disseminate and report. So rather than go all the time, you need to really look at the cloud and realize the cloud is one of the ways to solve this problem. Okay? Now we aren't the only ones trying to solve this problem. There are big companies like ServiceNow that has a big GRC program. Our problem with it wasn't good. It was $500,000 to shake their hand on that program. So for most people, it's very difficult, you know, for them to implement that. We're not, even at our size, we're not likely to give them $500,000 to start our program. You know,
right.
It's just too big. So we took advantage of something else. Now, the other benefit of doing it in the cloud, so if I go to your company, yours, and I give you a secure cloud access to do your assessment, in the background, okay, I can do consolidated reporting and find out that 45% of my supply chain doesn't yet have multi-factor authentication. You know, very low-hanging fruit on the cyber chain, right? So the first thing I do is create a program, if I were trying to fix my supply chain, say, hey, everybody, you've got to get MFA. Because MFA is one of the, you know, compromised credentials is one of your #1 areas to break in. So how many of my suppliers in that chain don't have that? And start going down the, you know, the risk areas and be able to see it. The problem is today, most of this stuff is done in a spreadsheet or, you know, they talk to them or it's not done, or it's just frankly not done. Now they're trying to do it in the military, but the reality is everybody else is just as exposed. Candidly, if I were a supermarket and we had a major cyber attack against the US, I'd attack food, I'd attack power, I'd attack all of these different areas in my supply chain. You know, I mean, let's face it, at one point you had to stock up on toilet paper here, right?
Yeah.
You know, because of COVID. Couldn't even get damn toilet paper. You know, some things are pretty important. I put toilet paper pretty high on the list.
It's not too distant of a
Yeah. Okay, so the truth of the matter is, you don't, if you're going to apply CMMI, you don't, to do numeric measurement, you're not really limited to using it with NIST, CSF, or ISO or the others. You really can layer that on others. The problem you're going to have, and it's truthfully a problem, is complexity. Okay, so when we look at NIST, CSF's first line item, you know, our systems, you know, and processes, inventory, this, that, the other, that's really about 8 capabilities. It's not a single one. It's not really yes or no, okay? But in some cases, if you're dealing with small suppliers, the best you might be able to get is a yes or no, right? And in those cases, if they're doing partial, it's probably going to be a no. They haven't really done it all. So you have to really put some sanity on this thing and look at the size of the organization. Tier 1, upper tier 2, you can do much more. As you get smaller, you're going to have to size accordingly. You know, if you're a smaller vendor, they're also in most cases lower risk to you. You're probably buying less. If you're buying a key critical component from a small supplier that has no cybersecurity, then you have to make a decision. You know, do I add new suppliers? Do I do multiple suppliers? What do I do to make sure my supply chain is not at risk? Now, we are typically most commonly working with the bigger ones, like NIST, ISO, this is a Canadian framework, or GDPR on privacy or others. So these are examples of them. Typically, you need, when you're creating one of these programs, to have a group of functions. You need a supplier portal. whether we're using Salesforce for our portal. You could use ServiceNow, you could use your own portals, but you need to have security and you need to have language support if you're multinational. So one of the reasons we used Salesforce is it supports something like 50 languages, and the security component per user comes embedded into the base, right? So I didn't have to write my own login security modules. I didn't have to worry about language support. I didn't have to create from scratch. So the reality is you take advantage of what's out there, and most companies around now often have Salesforce already in place. So you can piggyback on top of it and use the portal technology that's in there. We do a campaign on it to onboard and the others, and I'll show you how what we do internally, what we do. Example, I have said I'm not going to show you our internal systems. I'm going to show you an example. So you're not going to see my exact one, but you'll see an example. But the idea behind this is to create portal access, a way to measure and report on it, model your assessments so that you can do different assessments, measure them, do the risk analysis, analyze it, and go back to the starting. So if I do it first half of 2022, I expect to be redoing it either by the end of the year or repeating it for my certifications. Now, not all of them require certs. ISO requires certification. SOC 2 certification. CMMC certification. But if I want to do a NIST CSF, because I'm not the others, that's not a bad thing for you to do. That's a reasonable thing for non-military. Let's say I have a business that sells 40% to the military and 60% commercial. Well, my commercial vendors, I might not want to put through a CMMC audit. I might just want to assess them against NIST cybersecurity framework, and have a reasonable assessment of their readiness and their risk to me as a supplier, right? Okay. I'm not going to cover that much. I have seen some creative attempts out there on this. So I'm going to raise this because I like the idea so much. Some of them looked at making them supplier-funded programs. Okay? So they say, in order to be a vendor, you've got to sign up for your cyber supply chain risk management to be a considered vendor, and we charge $50 to sign up for the portal for you to do this kind of thing. Now, people ask, how well does it work? I said, from what I've seen of the people attempting this, is it's very price sensitive. If I said $5,000 versus $50, you know, my adoption rate's going to drop like a rock, right? So it is a creative idea. I like it. I've seen a few people out there trying it. But one thing we saw for sure is that when they tried it, if they got greedy, it didn't work. They had to make it nominal enough that they'll sign up. But most people have budget problems for this, right? You know, unlimited budgets, anyone? No chance, right? Let's be honest. They view it as a cost. Even though this is a critical risk component to the business, often people don't have the foresight to realize that this is critical, business critical, and they just view it as a cost. So you've got to have a way to figure out how you're going to fund your program. I've seen this. I like it. It isn't widespread. Okay, so I did briefly talk about continuous improvement. CMMI is a continuous improvement model. It's designed, measure, you know, find my problems, remediate, go back and remeasure, and to continuously do that. Because you don't always go forward. You might make an acquisition of a new company, and they might pull your cyber and your risk backwards, right? So you need to remeasure. So you're trying to continuously improve. But let's be honest. You know, I'm getting older. I don't continuously improve in the gym all the time. I try, but I'm not continuously improving. Neither are the companies. They're no different than that, because you 2 steps forward, 1 back, et cetera. Sure. So you just have to be aware that you need to put this as an ongoing program. Now I put this, why does it matter? I want to repeat this because it's really critical. What happens? Well, they can shut you down indirectly by shutting down your supply chain for key products, components, or others. You're still shut down, okay? They can shut you down directly, okay? Now, if you look at public corporations, you'll see this in their 10Ks and their reporting. They'll be talking about their risks and their others. They're required to disclose that, okay? So they really don't have a choice. If you can't deliver toilet paper and meat and fuel and others, you have lost revenue in customers. I mean, customers aren't very happy with people that can't deliver the products that they're trying to buy. But worse are these that scare me. You know, the scary national securities are no food on the shelves, no water or power coming into my house, no gas for my car, or the military shut down. Okay? Now these, they've proven they can do it. Okay? They did it with the meat supplier, they did it with the fuel out east, but they never have gone full force. Okay? And from a business standpoint, when I'm talking to them, I'm saying if you're not checking this, then you could easily be a victim of it in the future. You know, and that's really critical. So when you're talking to the executive levels that don't understand, put it to where they matter. Say, wait a second, this is what you have to worry about. You know, I know we're talking about all this other stuff. We'll tell you how to do it, but this is the real problem, fundamental problem, and it's a $1 trillion problem. Yeah. It's not $1 billion. You know, the supply chain is a $1 trillion problem. Now, I'm happy to help people with information on this. Grab my email or send it to Austin, my coworker, and we'll help you with any of the stuff and information. I volunteer for I'm a chair for the IAPP International. I'm on the ISSA Cybersecurity Board, and I'm an ISACA member. Okay, so I'm involved in all 3 organizations. I told Dave I didn't go on the ISACA board because I was spread too thin. They asked me to join them to help them with some of this stuff, but I might as some of my other stuff disappears. Maybe I'll join the local. We'll have to see later.
Doors open, man.
I'm always open and trying to help the others. By the way, the people in the room, there is a big cybersecurity conference in September in LA, put on by ISSA LA. Normally about 600 people show up for it. I'm in charge of volunteers. I've got 22 of the 30 volunteers I need. But when you volunteer, it's only for a few hours, and then the rest of the time you go to the conference for free. So actually, it's a good deal for those who want to do that. Just reach out to me. It's end of September. I expect to fill my volunteer queue in the next week or 2 for that. Now, hopefully, I probably logged out of a few of these things. I'm going to show you an example of how to do this in an automated fashion. And this is actually real. This is Salesforce. I'm showing you an example of how to put one of these together in Salesforce. We do this ourselves. We do it for some e-commerce companies. We do it for Cyberproof. I'm doing it for one of the large Japanese manufacturers. So essentially, we take the native functionality in here and we add suppliers. You load suppliers. By the way, these are real suppliers. This is mostly done in Bradstreet data and real suppliers. So I am not going to execute an email blast out to this database, okay? Because I know this is real. Only the first one that I have cheated on and modified intentionally and deleted them out are there. You also can put the contact. So when you're trying to run these programs, you don't try to run these manual. You put them in an engine that will go out there and say, here are all my vendors. Here are the contacts of all my vendors. Okay, so I've loaded this in via spreadsheet or wherever I load it, and I'm not doing it manually. And then you create a campaign that says, okay, I'm trying to deal with an onboarding campaign for my risk program. I want to onboard all my vendors. How do I do that? You know, you do it manually, good luck. You know, you'll be there forever. But if you go in here, you click it, you just create a program in here, and it takes advantage of your campaign ones. And in this program example, I pulled 106 companies into this particular program. And then these things will do things like track who has started their assessment, who's actually doing it, who is not doing it. So then you can start doing follow-up and reporting. So this is the back end of this. I'm going to show you what an end user would see, or a little bit of what an end user, because it makes it much easier for them of how you would set up a program like this. And I'll repeat, this was built for us originally, so I'm not going to go through the other detail. So normally you just create a portal. It's just a website. Okay. Now I am already logged in up here in the top corner. Normally, let me do something. if they are not plugged in, you normally will use these. Sorry, I've got too many resources. I think this is the one I'm looking for. I'll find out if this is the one I want or not. So normally you can create these where you just create a registration as part of the program. So you don't have to do any registration. You set it up with when the email goes out, their security settings are in the back. They log in and sign up and get started in here. So these things handle all of that with the security and the registration that the Salesforce portals do. I'll repeat, in ServiceNow, you can do it in other platforms. We picked this because it was lower cost and worldwide. You know, our thought process was we needed cloud. We're a worldwide entity. We needed multilingual. There were certain criteria for us that might be different for you.
Right? Yeah, like you said, the security is baked in.
And the security is baked in. So this is a world-class cloud platform. One of the things for us is we do technical assessments, but we're also a cybersecurity supplier. And we have to be ISO certified and some other things for our customers to do business with us. So therefore, it was a key criteria for us. Okay. So in here, now I'm in a more advanced one because I'm a system administrator. So normally you wouldn't put them in, give them choices. So normally you would bring them right to whatever assessment you wanted them to do. But this is an example of what we use for a NIST cybersecurity assessment. So we use the standards of NIST, which are identify, protect, detect, respond, recover. Those are the functional pillars within NIST cybersecurity framework. And underneath that, we use the next categories: asset management, business environment, so on and so forth down there. So you take this ugly spreadsheet that you get from NIST and you put it into a format that matches it well so people can follow. Because otherwise it just becomes spreadsheets from hell, right? And when you do that, you can just go out here. Now this is a CMMI example. So in this particular case, we've layered in capabilities with a level, okay? So if they're level 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5, in this particular example. Now if you're doing something like an ISO or others, or a SOC 2, you'll need to add the URL that allows you to collect evidence. Because in those cases, it's a requirement for CMC, SOC, the others, you have to have evidence collection, right?
Yeah, but like this is a bit of a self-attestation here, but when you get into the others.
But you could turn on evidence collection here too. I didn't in this example, but the ability to turn on and store that secure, because you've got to have evidence in some of these ones that you do. But they're pretty straightforward. If you answer yes, okay, I just go out and answer yes. It brings me to another question. It just jumps me through. Once I start answering no, it tells me that I only answered 2 of them. But if I'm a level 2 CMMI, I can't be a level 3, 4, or 5. So it skips all those questions. Because you got to go up each stair. You can't skip the stairs. You can't go 1, I'm 5. Sorry, doesn't work that way. It's not how CMMI is designed. And then in that particular case, the nice thing about these online cloud type platforms is if we go back and you have a more advanced one, and I'm going to pick an example assessment that's more complete. Sorry, I do a million of these. Let's try this one right here. They actually have widgets and reporting engines where you can just display the reporting, and you can do roll-ups and consolidations internally or for multiple companies. And they also generally, these type of tools, okay, give you the ability to, let me pick one that has a reporting option. Normally you can grab reports and other things and export them to CSVs, this, that, the other. So if you want to create your assessment and then send a report to management or the suppliers that have participated, you can actually just export the data out. So the nice thing about these are, years ago, it was manual email this. As long as you get yourself a strongest cloud platform and you can set it up and the others, it's a hell of a lot easier and a hell of a lot more effective. So when you're really looking to do these cyber risk programs, if I go back to it, number one, supply chain is messed up and is at real risk right now on the cyber side. Number two, stay in the standards, right? If you stay in the standards, then you can compare, bring in different consulting groups, your own internals, the others, and you can defend your position, right? If somebody asks me, well, how did you do that? I said, well, 50% of the US uses NIST cybersecurity framework, and I'm using that. I think I get a pretty good backing behind me that this is a good choice, right? Or ISO or the others. That's why those are critical. And use the cloud, people. Do not make it on-premise. Don't do these custom. Take advantage of these type of capabilities that are out there, because there's no reason to invent the wheel. A lot of the people try to reinvent the wheel on this stuff. I take a look at it and I just get sad.
Yeah.
You know, I'm like, wow, I could have bought that off the shelf. It's like building your own tire for your car. I buy tires when I need new tires. I'm not out there trying to press them in the backyard. You know,
Yep.
some rubber in the tire. I'm out there buying them, and it's available today. Nice thing is, this stuff's available if you know where to look. You can get it. If you don't know where to look, I don't know all the sources, but if you call me and you tell me what you have, I'll tell you, you can probably use a combination of these to actually get this done. Okay? I think that's it. I'm hoping that was helpful to the group today. That was all I was planning on covering today. I know we have until 1:15, but I intentionally left. Oh, I take that back. One thing, let me do this one other thing here. I missed one thing. I apologize. My fault. We talked about campaigns, but in these type of engines, what you can actually do in these is you can, this is standard off-the-shelf functionality. This isn't something of ours. You can actually use these for an onboarding type campaign and grab templates. So I just said, welcome to the supply chain risk reduction community. It sucks all the data out of the platform, puts it out there. They end up getting an email like this, customized to the individual one, with the URLs that you're sending them to sign up for your program. You can use this for follow-up for the people that don't do it. So this was an example of an initial onboarding type campaign. This template here, go back. I apologize. I'm so used to doing these online in my office. I told poor Dave that I used to do, hundreds of people training sessions, but I got butterflies. I haven't been standing in front of humans in so long.
Yeah.
I forgot what it was like to have humans in the same room.
When you were sharing, this is the first post-COVID in-person presentation.
So here's an example of just a different one. Important notice, your cyber risk assessment is due. So you can create these whole follow-up campaigns that are all automated, so you're not really manually, and it will track, all of that for you in the background, kind of off the shelf. Yes?
And will the platform, like you were saying earlier, where let's say I'm your vendor,
Yeah.
and I fill that out in 2021,
Yeah.
and then I fill it out in 2022 to be able to show the comparative,
Yes.
if I've made progress.
It does more than that in these type of platforms. It also keeps date, time, audit stamps, who answered it, when they answered it, how they answered it, and you can actually duplicate previous year's assessments into new year's so that you're only making modifications to your changes.
Gotcha.
You can do all sorts of things like that, but it would still retain the original audit of when they answered in those cases. So once you're in these kind of world-class hub environments, you can do things that are difficult otherwise, because it has it sitting under. So problem for me is, you could build this on premise. The problem is you need to distribute it out to people, right?
Oh,
and then
sure.
you have access. And I need the security components of it, which I don't want to build from scratch. Security from scratch is Amazon Cloud. If I were going to go on a cloud, I'd go on an Amazon Cloud. It's got so much of the security platform. 15 years ago, when the cloud stuff first came out, I was scared to death because the security was weak. Today, it's better than 98% of the people's on-prem security. So I would move them into this kind of thing, knowing that I've got important data, it's cloud, and the clouds today, security are better. You have to worry about credentials still, right? You have to make sure you're responsible for your credentials, but it's still better than most people's on-prem data centers or their own data centers, right? So I missed that. I apologize. I didn't mean to miss that piece of why you would use these tools.
Yeah.
So did that answer? I think I did more than the one question. I added a couple of items like audit copy.
Yeah, that's
Those are really
fantastic.
important.
Because it really helps to put it into context.
Right.
You know,
And
we were
roll-up.
talking about earlier this week that there's data, then there's data about the data,
Right.
you know.
I think the roll-up's really important because if you can identify where the key problems are in your supply chain, then you focus your time, you get the biggest bang for the buck. And I like MFA because anybody who's not using MFA today is insane, right? I mean, if you're not doing multi-factor and some reasonable point out that such low-hanging that I think you're crazy not to do that.
So in your platform,
Yes.
you have a question?
Yes, of course. So that's one of the things in any of the frameworks, whether it be ISO or NIST cybersecurity framework, the others, multi-factor authentication is one of the things they're going to ask.
So when the vendor, when you get the answers for the 160 emails that you send, maybe you can show to the board or the executive.
Correct.
Oh,
You get a consolidated
80% of my vendors has multi-factor.
Yes, and these 20% that I don't, I create a new campaign out that says, here are some, I partnered with some multi-factor vendors, pick them or pick another, but pick one. You need to do this in order to be a vendor because you're at great risk of getting hacked because you're not even doing basic cyber hygiene, right? Which is multi-factor. I put it in the basic cyber hygiene. Anyone agree? Any other hands? Basic cyber hygiene? Yeah, it's critical.
Yeah.
As a simple example, but I'm still shocked when they're not doing it.
Right.
Now, there are some legacy systems and others that they have problems with it, but I make it at least have multi-factor access to the network, never mind the app.
I was at the ISACA meeting in LA last night, and Michael, who was a special agent there, was essentially saying that was kind of like 30% of his talk. He's like, nearly every incident that I run into, someone just didn't have multi-factor even present or it wasn't enabled.
I know Michael,
Oh, okay.
actually,
Yeah.
quite well, and I didn't go to that meeting last night because I had to come here today, because I'm on that board, so I normally go, but I didn't want to be exhausted on my first in-person meeting here in a couple of years, so I did not do the drive to the dinner meeting last night. Michael's a good guy.
Yeah,
Actually,
great talk.
yeah, he's a good guy. I like him.
No, and it's always interesting to hear those statistics because one will all be within our circles and stuff. We know what we expect and things like that, but then to hear what's really happening out there.
I think Michael and some of my other friends are why I got kicked off of jury when I went in for jury duty. They're like, do you meet with law enforcement? I'm like, well, I normally meet with the FBI. And I meet with, so the defense attorney didn't really like that answer, very much, which is true because I know Michael's son.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know Michael pretty well. So, interesting. Well, I hope it was valuable. I hope you get something out of these. You know, I'm pretty passionate about these areas. I care about them. I practice what I preach. I do multi-factor. I do VPNs on all my devices and phones. I do private browsers. If you didn't notice on my browser, I'm using DuckDuckGo and some of those other things. So I actually practice this stuff. I usually do what somebody calls a parlor trick at the end of the one, which is, how many people have iPhones in here today? Okay, most of the room. Does everybody know what significant locations are on your iPhone? Okay, we got 2 yeses. How about the rest of you?
No.
Okay.
No.
So I want you to go to your location services. Take out your phone, go to location services, okay? And they hide it. So they're spying on you at a level that is kind of creepy on your phone. So let me get to it. It's location services, right? This location. Privacy. I should probably get her to help me. She shook her head so she knows what significant locations are.
Yeah.
Where's my location services button?
Under privacy.
Oh, thank you.
Under what?
Privacy. When you go to that and you get to the location services and you go to the very bottom, there's something called system services here. Then you have to scroll again to the very bottom, close to the very bottom, and you see significant locations. Okay?
Yeah.
If that is turned on, they're tracking where you go, when you go there, how long you stay there. Okay? All the time. I say it's a divorce attorney's dream. You know, They just subpoena your phone and ask for significant locations. Or let's say you're a big firm, you're a law firm. I get a copy of that data from your phone. I know every client you have, everywhere you went.
I'm sorry, where at? Location services under privacy?
You go to the bottom and you'll see significant locations. You got to go system services and scroll down to near the bottom of it. You'll see significant locations. Okay? Now, there you go. Scroll up, no, scroll down. You've got to be in location services. Are you?
Yeah, I'm under privacy.
Okay, so go to location services. Now scroll down. System services. Scroll down. Significant locations is on for you. That means they're tracking you. Everywhere you go, when you go, how long you stay there, all
There's
of
a
that.
lot of green icons here.
Yeah. It's kind of creepy. Now, they claim they don't sell this. I have some skepticism as to what refused or should not use to stay in court. I'm sorry. I'm a skeptic. I admit it. We are a surveillance society today. They surveil us quite closely in many cases, and that's one example where there's surveillance that they're not, and they're hiding it.
Yeah.
As soon as you hide something, clearly my antenna goes up. If you're putting it out in front of me, I'm like, oh, okay, maybe you're actually doing what you said. Once you start burying it in my phone, where it's really not obvious, then it concerns me. So that's a prime example of, data that they have, not sure they should have, how are they really using it. I mean, they were doing sleep tracking at one point where they weren't admitting it for people who wear their Apple Watches to sleep. And I was against it. I only did this because my wife and daughters gave it to me as a gift. And I like it when I go hiking, biking, the others to track it. But at night and the others, both my phone, the other things get hidden. Significant locations are off. I'm very selective as to apps I install. I'm using an inexpensive VPN, Nord. It's inexpensive, but at least it's a VPN. Yeah. So I know that I'm encrypted when I'm on any Wi-Fi, etc. Okay, I think that's really it. I know I'm 5 minutes early.
No, this is great. We usually keep the last 15 minutes just as quality time to take advantage of.
Okay.
So this is terrific.
So I'll repeat, I hope it was useful. Hope you get something new. I'm very disappointed when I go to them and I get nothing new. When I go to a lot of these sessions and others to learn from others, and I'm hoping I gave you something new today. If nothing, at least your significant locations on your phone, Dave.
Yeah, no, this is fantastic. And even beyond all the technical stuff, one of the other takeaways I got was what you were describing in how the docs were backed up, the health implications.
Horrible.
On how they had to.
That's why they were lined up, all along the coast, about 100 miles. And up north and down here, there was 100 miles worth of ships, freighters. That was the week up in Orange County. One of the freighters dragged their anchor through the pipeline.
Yeah.
That's why it leaked.
Oh, wow.
And that's why the freighters were there.
Well, in Saudi, they found one full of people.
Say that one
They
again?
found one that had been waiting forever to dock, and when they finally docked it, it was full of immigrants. They'd all died waiting for the container to get unloaded.
That's just horrific.
Yeah.
I'm sorry to hear that one.
Yeah.
That's terrific.
I mean, they didn't know they were going to be on the boat for 3 months.
Oh. I'm not going to touch the immigration issue because that's such an ugly issue here for most of us. But my wife is from Brazil. My kids are dual nationals. I'm pro-immigration. I just wish we'd fix it. Most of the people who come are just trying to feed their families. But there are criminals and others. I have friends in Border Patrol that got shot across the border, a friend of mine.
Yeah.
And, so there are problems there.
That's a whole other presentation.
I don't, I would have to prep that one. I'm knowledgeable about it, but I need some work to be able to do that.
Sure.
I can have an intelligent conversation, but I'm not ready to present that topic.
Understood.
I had my blue card in Brazil, which is the equivalent of a green card here.
Okay.
So I worked in Brazil, actually.
Gotcha.
All right, well, thank you, everybody.
Thank you. And Mark, we did have.
By the way, our company's always hiring. When you ask about hiring, go out to the UST site. We've always got jobs published. out there. There's always jobs, because we always have so much. At 30,000 people and growing, they always have turnover.
Whatever we have here, like the loss in ISACA panels, I just
Stays on.
All right, I can do that. There's always jobs.